wasn't until I was 11 years old that I recall even learning what a U.S. Senator was. And the person who fascinated me most was this man of Japanese descent with one arm, full of dignity and grace. And so to see this man, this senator, this powerful, accomplished person who wasn't out of central casting, and the way he commanded the respect of an entire nation, I think it hinted to me what might be possible in my own life.
President Obama remembering Senator Daniel Inouye on Friday, a rare moment in Washington where Democrats and Republicans came together to honor that American hero. We're going to talk about the rest of the week's politics now on our roundtable, joined by Peggy Noonan of the Wall Street Journal, Mayor Cory Booker of Newark, ABC's political analyst Matthew Dowd, also Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform, also an NRA board member, and Katrina vanden Heuvel, publisher and editor of The Nation. You also write a weekly column for WashingtonPost.com. And let's begin with this fiscal cliff. Peggy, let me bring this to you. The Wall Street Journal yesterday, your newspaper, had a fascinating blow-by-blow of how the Speaker's Plan B collapsed on Thursday after the talks with the President collapsed as well. In your view, what went wrong here? It seemed like there were so many wrong turns and an absolute collapse.
Yeah, it has been a bit of a debacle, I think you can actually say. It's been I think the Speaker has been in an impossible situation, and I think that he tried to put forward a plan that just might save things a little, and it didn't work. I do think part of the story, which doesn't get enough attention from folks like us, is that the president has been a little Michael Corleone towards the Republicans in the negotiations with Boehner, in that essentially he is saying, when Boehner says, I'll give you this, I'll give you this, I think the president is more or less saying, this is what I'll give you, nothing. He doesn't want to do spending. The Republicans are willing to bend on taxes, but spending is where the real action is. And I really do think that this may go up to the end and might go over.
I think that's very possible. I think, Matthew Dowd, one of the things the White House would argue is that they did the spending cuts last year. He offered about $600 billion this time around. But no question, the president taking a firm line in these negotiations. But speaking of the impossible situation that Peggy just mentioned, it does appear that no matter what Speaker Boehner negotiates with the president, it is something that cannot get through his conference.
Well, first, Merry Christmas to you and your family and everybody here. We're about happy holidays to all that, and I have a sticker that my daughter made me wear of Santa Claus until Santa Claus comes. So, Josephine, you better be being nice and not naughty. I mean, I think this demonstrates this fiscal cliff, and I know we're going to talk about the whole debate over hometown or Newtown, which I actually think encompasses a problem that's systematic in this country right now, is that both sides, both far left and the far right, stake out dogma and stake out purity of positions, and it doesn't allow the people in the middle that actually have to gain the yards on the field to get the job done that they need to get done. And both sides, I think, stick to a dogma that's really not true and really the American public really doesn't believe. Republicans want to stick to dogma saying that you can't raise taxes and that's not going to fix the problem. And Democrats and many on the far left stick to the thing is you can't do anything to fix entitlements. And the only way you can really fix this fiscal problem that exists, which is even if you fix this fiscal cliff, we still have a fiscal problem, is to go in the middle and argue over both tax increases, which everybody knows needs to go up in order to fix the problem, and spending cuts and entitlement
The middle
reform.
exists in the country. It may not exist in Washington, but on your point about dogma, Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, of course, you've popularized the no-tax pledge for many years, but on this plan by the Speaker, which would have allowed taxes to go up and those making over $1 million a year, your group said this wasn't a tax increase, and that still wasn't good enough for a lot of House Republicans.
Well, let's understand, there is a plan to actually solve the debt that's been run up, the deficits to continue, the entitlement reform and tax reform to get more pro-growth tax reform. And that's the Ryan plan, which has actually been passed twice by the House of Representatives. People can talk about...
No support in the Senate, no support from the President. Okay. It's not going anywhere. Okay.
But the Democrats in the Senate haven't done a budget in 3-4 years, haven't put anything forward that deals with entitlements. There's one and only one plan that's actually been passed by one House. The President hasn't put anything forward that fixes entitlements. I mean, his plan, his budget, if you continue it out, to 2040, 2050, takes you to 38% of GDP, and the economy collapses because CBO can't support any further.
This gets to an issue that I think other analysts have brought up during the week. It is, you're right, about Congressman Ryan's plan passing the House, but there has been an election in November, and the House Republicans are only one part of Washington right now. They don't
the
run
president's
Washington.
only one part. The Republicans actually passed a budget, not just a budget, but a budget plan that goes out through the years, gives you entitlement reform, gives you pro-growth tax reform, does not raise taxes. You don't have to raise taxes to balance the budget. The left wants to raise taxes, but you don't have to balance the budget and take the debt down. So they've got a plan, they've passed it, and they got reelected having done that. The Senate got reelected because they never voted on anything. It's the only way they were able to get reelected. And so they haven't even put something forward. And the president's plan was an outline that the House and the Senate voted against. You can't argue you have a mandate when your own party voted against your budget.
Katrina, respond to that.
George, there was an election, and Americans voted very clearly for a sense of different priorities than Grover Norquist has stood for. One was that the richest in this country pay their fair share. And I also resist very strongly Matthew Dowd, with the good Band-Aid and all, but what he said about the left and the right, because it's not just the left, it's not just progressives, it's Americans, and survey after survey support Social Security, Medicare, and to take Social Security away from widowed women when the richest are paying the lowest taxes in modern memory is not about being a compassionate country in this time of season. It is about a country that's lost its way. There are good ways to reduce the debt and deficit, but the largest issue, George, is that this is a manufactured crisis. We don't have a short-term deficit problem. We have a jobs and growth problem, and we have a faltering recovery, but we should put off the sequester, put off this grand bargain, come back. Let the Bush tax cuts expire. Make sure the middle class don't have to pay.
Just go over the cliff at this point.
The cliff is a manufactured media drama. But the largest point is to say that the left or progressives are the ones who are supporting the great reforms of this country at a time when the richest are paying their lowest
I would just counter that
effective
maybe,
tax
but
burden.
on January 2nd, when everyone's taxes go up, it may not feel like it's a manufactured media event. It may feel real to an awful lot of Americans.
It will.
Well, but that's the point. I mean, and this is what folks don't understand, where I think she's actually making a very strong point here, is we're taking this this incredible mallet and about to smash America, and the people that are going to suffer for that are the people in my community who want to try to go to college, are going to lose out on avenues to do that, because that's what this sequestration will mean. About the FBI agents that will be cut, that are protecting our borders, protecting our nation from challenges. People are going to be cut out on the programs that support the poorest Americans getting access to healthy food and a strong strength for their children. And this is really what bothers me right now, is there is a way forward through this.
Well, and there is a way forward, and Peggy, I want to bring this back to you, but it does seem, if you look at the constellation of forces in Washington right now, that the only way that something is actually going to get to the president's desk is if House Speaker John Boehner agrees to let there be a vote on something that will get Democratic votes and Republican votes and probably shear off his most conservative members.
That may be true. That may be where this whole thing ends, but I think it still has to be made, this point, that everybody, Republicans included in Capitol Hill, they all know there's going to be a tax increase. They know
it's done.
This is coming. Even if it doesn't come in sequester, it's going to come in a deal. So they all know that. But for two reasons. One, for the seriousness of it, a $16 trillion long-term debt has to be dealt with. And also so Republicans can say, okay, we got something, a little fiscal sanity in return for a tax increase. There ought to be plenty room for there. There, for the president.
The president is suggesting
and the
fiscal
House.
sanity. The president, as part of his plan, has spending cuts. The reality is that there has been compromise and there has been give, and we have a way forward not to hurt American people. And what we're driving ourselves to is a real fiscal cliff. There will be thousands of dollars cut for families that are barely making their mortgage payments, that are barely holding on. And so to have a ridiculous debate right now, when really real American families are in the lurch now, are going to be suffering in ways that most of Washington doesn't seem to understand.
So what's the way out?
Then why doesn't the president stop this? He is the one who can deal with Boehner. He's been
He's tried to deal with Boehner.
I think Boehner wants to do it.
The Senate's not allowing votes either.
The way out ultimately has to be right down the middle. Right down the middle where there's a series of compromises. Every good leadership is about both conservative ideas and progressive ideas. We have to move forward. We have to move forward in the future, and we also have to conserve the ideas and thoughts that actually are helpful to the country. Leadership is about both of those ideas. Wait, Katrina. The problem we have is both the left and the right set down markers on the table, and Grover and his group says we can do this without raising taxes on the wealthy. That
passed the bill.
You cannot call for a sacrifice by average Americans and say we're not going to raise taxes on the wealthy. And you also have to, we all know the dynamics of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, the demography of this country cannot sustain,
I want to make a deal with Grover. I want to make a deal with Grover. There are fair share ways to reduce the deficit. The short-term deficit isn't the main problem we have. But the Republicans last week voted to keep the defense budget out of the cuts, out of the sequester. I would like to say to Mr. Norquist that the left and the right, citizens of conscience and sanity, should agree that the most bloated, wasteful, fraudulent piece of our budget is the defense budget, and we should make cuts in that. We should do a financial transaction tax. We should tackle the subsidies to big oil, big pharma. Those are the drivers of the problems of our economy. Social Security shouldn't, by law, cannot contribute to the federal deficit, so it shouldn't even be in the same sentence with debt.
Let him respond.
While we talk about imaginary things that might happen in the future, on January 1st and 2nd, we have a very real thing that nobody here has talked about, and people at home know they haven't been hearing about it from the press, and that is there's a series of tax increases to pay for Obamacare that start January 2nd in this country. The president is taking those off the table. This is not part of the sequester or the fiscal cliff. This is a $1 trillion tax increase over the next decade that just hits. So there's a $20 to $30 billion over the next 10 years tax on medical devices. It's going to make stents, prosthetic devices more expensive.
The law by the president.
And it's the law of the land, and it's a tax. 90% of the tax increases to pay for Obamacare, conveniently, interestingly, began to take effect after the president got himself safely reelected. If you're a poor person and you get sick and you have 7.5% of your adjustable gross income of your income used up in medical costs, the president's decided, the Democrats in Congress voted to take that.
But I take your point there, but all that's
average Americans who are very sick are paying $2 to $3 billion more in taxes to pay for Obamacare. These are tax increases on the middle class put there by Obama. He wants you to talk about taxing the rich because he's busy socking it to the middle class.
Listen, I'm sorry. There's a luxury of a debate here that Washington may have, that folks like me on the ground in cities all across America don't have. I got to balance budgets. I can't get into philosophical debates. What we've had to do in Newark is we've had to cut our workforce almost 25%. We've had to cut government spending almost 20%. But you know what? We've had to raise taxes as well because it's a pragmatic way forward. But this is what I've learned in Newark. If you start cutting programs for the poor, you start to inflict a damage not on the poor, but on yourself. Because in this country, it's the truth. It's easier to raise strong children than to heal broken men. And we wonder why we have such expensive prison systems, why we have such high medical costs, is because we're not making the front-end investments. And if this country is going to cut investments in colleges and universities, cut programs that give people access to college, we may get a short-term benefit from that, but we're going to lose the long-term gain from making
I think our table today is reflecting why Congress might be having a lot of trouble as well. Let's turn on to the other big debate of the week coming out of the tragedy in Newtown, the debate over how to confront violence in schools and across the country. We saw that press conference by Wayne LaPierre on Friday, the National Rifle Association Executive Vice President, and boy, it drew a fierce reaction. Look at the covers of the two New York tabloids, Daily News, the New York Post, Daily News, craziest man on earth, New York Post, gun nut. Grover, you are a member of the board of the NRA, and I know you agree with the positions of the organization, but do you think that performance helped your cause on Friday?
Well, what's interesting is the reaction to Wayne LaPierre, because he heads the NRA. When Bill Clinton introduced the same idea on April 16th in 1999 after Columbine, federal money for armed guards at schools, you didn't see
the presentation might have mattered.
Well, it may have, but I think there's a very interesting point that the idea actually is one that has a bipartisan background. I know that the leadership of the NRA was just over in Israel, actually meeting with the people who do the training for the people who carry guns in schools to protect children. This is an idea that seems fairly reasonable, and when presented by Bill Clinton, New Yorkers didn't attack it. And so I think part of what we're seeing, I think sadly, is again Rahm Emanuel's comment, never let a good crisis go to waste. And the gun control advocates for a long time have jumped on every tragedy and tried to exploit it in unhelpful ways. I think the NRA did well to hold off for a while in responding.
I take what you say about the mood of it. Here's something that I think was important. The first half of the Wayne LaPierre statement, in which he passionately scored our culture, the video games, the movies, the whole thing. We've all been through this for 25 years, and yet we cannot say it enough. Our culture is helping to make unstable people sick and dangerous. It does make a contribution. He was right to say it. I was delighted to hear it. I am for the banning of the extended magazines or extended clips. I can never figure out exactly how to say that, but I know what it is. I don't think there's any reason to have 33 bullets in a killing machine that you can take into a place like a school. I think that there are simple and discreet measures that can be taken in Capitol Hill, such as the banning the magazines, that could actually be helpful for our country and would give us a feeling of relief.
George,
One
I don't know.
small, discreet thing was done.
Please. I don't know if anybody here has seen somebody shot. I have. I don't know if anybody here has had to put their hand in somebody's chest and try to stop the bleeding so somebody doesn't die. I have. And what frustrates me about this debate is it's a false debate. It's a false debate. This is a convenient trick to try to divide our country more. Most of us in America, including gun owners, agree on things that would stop the kind of carnage that's going on in cities all over America. Let me agree with Grover for a second. All the shootings in my city, only one I can find was done with a law-abiding citizen that's mentally stable that bought a gun. I'm not afraid of law-abiding citizens. Buy a gun, buy the guns you want. What the problem is in America right now is that a terrorist person who's on the no-fly list could go into the secondary market today and buy weapons. We need to shut down these secondary markets. And when you poll NRA members, 74% agree that nobody in America should be able to buy a gun without doing a background check. So let's stop the false debate. Let's just pass what Americans agree on, and you'll shut down the debate.
Matthew go and then Katrina.
Part of what happens, it's so many things in Washington, it's built on myth. Yeah. And it's not reality. And the NRA and the leadership of the NRA is built on myth. I would not have guessed that anybody who has diminished credibility could get up and do something and diminish their credibility more than what Wayne LaPierre did on Friday in his press conference. Average folks, just like Cory said, average folks know that you got to do something about this. They know it's comprehensive. They know this. I live in Texas. I own 5 guns. And all the folks I associate with, when you go out hunting, you take your guns and you put them in a safe and everybody goes to bed. The Wild West, everybody talks about the Wild West, almost every part of the Wild West is you checked your guns at the door before you walked in somewhere in a Wild West town, is the way it used to be. I worked for Senator Benson, who you know and worked serving your administration. Senator Benson represented Texas. He helped pass the assault weapons ban. Though it may not solve the problem, I actually expected Wayne LaPierre to stand up and say exactly what he said, and then say, oh, by the way, I have stuck to too many dogmatic positions for too long, and it's time we ban the assault rifles.
But his membership agrees with these simple, pragmatic, common sense changes.
This is the important. The NRA is built on myths at this point in many ways. The NRA has 4 million members. It is essentially a lobby for gun manufacturers, not for its members. The majority of them, according to a poll commissioned by Frank Luntz, a Republican pollster, do not agree with the NRA's positions on background checks, on ban on assault weapons. I think that's very important because the NRA's myth has put us in a stranglehold in this country. The other thing I'd say is I respect the noble sentiments about the need to treat mental illness, the need to deal with the video games in our culture. But other Western industrialized countries have mental illness problems, have video culture. Japan is at the cutting edge. They don't allow access to military assault guns. This is not about freedom. This is about tyranny and destruction.
The thing is, it's about all of this. This is what frustrates me. I mean, you can't say it's got to be about one thing and not the other.
The problem is the mental illness. No, the mental illness argument has been used to evade action. More guns and bullets, more dead children. We must regulate guns. And I do think it's a tipping point moment, not just the Daily News and the New York Post, but you're seeing pro-NRA senators like Senator Manchin, Senator Warner, Governor Hickenlooper in Colorado, others saying we must move. Speed is of the essence.
I agree with that, and I think what you're saying, though, Senator Manchin did say we have to consider everything comprehensive. We should give Grover a chance to respond to some of this now.
Well, I think, look, the National Rifle Association represents a great number of Americans, and 20% will tell you in polls that they belong to the NRA. And so, one, there's a very important issue. One is we should support the First Amendment as well as the Second Amendment. I'm not quite sure. Some people's suggestions of censorship there worry me. But look, one, we ought to calm down and not take tragedies like this, crimes like this, and use them for political purposes. President Obama's been president for 4 years. If he thought that some gun control would solve this problem, he should have been pushing it 4 years ago. He didn't. Democrats had a majority in the House and a supermajority in the House and the Senate for the first 2 years that they were in office. If they thought that this was really an important issue, they might have done something then. They didn't. So what they're now doing is politicizing a tragedy rather than trying to do something that might
But can I make one? I'm sorry.
helpful.
I just want one point that's very important. What happened in Connecticut was a grievous tragedy.
Yes.
But every single day in America, every single day, people in communities like mine go to bed fearing violence. You see 34 people murdered every single day. And with carnage like this going on regularly in our country, when you have gun owners and non-gun owners, NRA members and non-NRA members that all agree, forget the ideological divides, all agree on changes that would make cities like mine safer. I'm tired of the political debates. They're not necessary. I'm tired of the ideological positions. We don't need to even visit them. Let's stick to the pragmatic center where all Americans believe the same thing, and let's pass legislation that would make America safer.
Pragmatism means what works. And those states with concealed carry permits that allow honest and decent citizens to carry a gun with them, they have less crime, and the crime has fallen faster than in states that don't.
When there's a bad kid in the schoolyard with a baseball bat, we don't give everybody else baseball bats and say go to deal with it and defend yourself. What we do is we take the baseball bat away from the bad kid or the bully, and then we sit down and say, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen? We got to take the baseball bat away from the bully.
Take domestic violence. Let's look at the data. 1 out of 2 women murdered by a gun are being murdered by someone they know. States that have taken the secondary markets and shut them down, they've reduced those murders by 40%. It didn't eliminate them. I'm not saying these are solves to the problem, but eliminating these secondary markets, which 74% of NRA members believe that should be done, so you don't have a terrorist who can't fly in a plane, could actually stop them from getting gun marks.
Let me
this
just
will make
put this back to Grover. Are there any of these proposals that everyone here is calling common sense? Do you think the NRA is open to considering any kind of reforms in the wake of this tragedy?
Well, the argument is, look, we ought to do things that work, and we ought to not do things that don't work, and we ought to take a look at what has worked. You want to drop the number of murders, you want to drop the number of rapes, you want to drop the number of armed robberies, have more people with concealed carry permits in your state. The data out there is clear. It's been out there for decades now. We know what works, which is allowing honest people to carry guns on themselves.
But don't the statistics also show that the states that have the more gun regulation and less gun ownership have lower levels of gun violence?
No. Chicago is probably the most heavily regulated city and state in the nation. Illinois that has the strongest gun laws.
Look where their guns come from.
D.C. up until recently.
I mean, coming back, other countries, I come back to this, even individualistic countries, you know, like Australia. In 1996, they had a gun rampage. You take the guns out. As Cory said, you begin to take the guns out. You begin to reduce the harm that can be done.
But don't wave the flag of Chicago around.
Two small points, two discrete points. One is there are many Americans who are very pro-Second Amendment, but they are not gun people themselves. I can tell you, let me speak for them for a moment. We consider the phrases like assault weapon, semi-automatic, automatic, assault rifle. All of those phrases appear to be terms of art used by people who occasionally are trying to mislead. I wish we could publicly make clear exactly which of these weapons are most dangerous, most unhelpful, and most unneeded. We could do that publicly. We could take a week and do that. I wish that would happen.
That would be very helpful.
Let me defend Rahm Emanuel for a second.
Let me finish your point and then.
I think somebody has to fairly make the point here that Americans have guns, not only because they love the sport, not only because they love hunting, not only because they think it is their right, not only in some cases because they're a little nutty and love guns. They also have guns because they are afraid. They think their society and their culture are very frail and in trouble. They think someday they may be on their own, They want guns to protect themselves and protect their families. I think that has to be respected and not denigrated.
So a military assault weapon which can pump 30 to 40 bullets in the face of a kid. That's what we need to protect ourselves in this country?
Look, those things I am against. But the idea of gun ownership and some significant gun ownership and strength is not to be denigrated. It is to be understood.
Let me agree with you, Peggy.
Look, we have to understand the culture we're in. A lot of Americans are very blue right now after Newtown because they think we can't turn this around. We are going to descend into violence.
We're having the wrong debate again.
Oh, my goodness.
Listen to me. The people dying in Chicago, the people dying in Newark are not being done with law-abiding gun owners.
That's right.
We do not need to go after the guns that a law-abiding, mentally stable American, that's not America's problem. What's happening in our inner cities, and this is where I get, don't wave Chicago, because where are Chicago's guns coming from? We trace the weapons that come into my city. They're not, and when residents look to me and say, stop the carnage, Cory, what I say is, look, the guns we're tracing, I have no power to stop them coming into my city as Rob doesn't coming into Chicago. They're coming from places that have free secondary markets where criminals and gun runners so easily buy weapons and pump them into communities like mine, where it is easy for a person who is a criminal to get their hands on a gun. No person, the NRA included, no person can justify a system in America where somebody like the Mumbai terrorists who didn't use a bomb, who used automatic and semi-automatic weapons that you could so easily get in this country.
That's why law enforcement support Cory.
We're finding these weapons on our street more and more. My police director, 25-year professional, has never seen as many automatic weapons that are showing up in my community, and they're not coming from law-abiding citizens. They're coming from a secondary trade.
Who is using them? Gangbangers? Who's using them? Who's killing people?
Criminals are killing people, not law-abiding gun owners.
That is going to have to be the last word today. This has been a terrific debate. Obviously, it will continue. Thanks to everyone on the roundtable. Have a good holiday. And now we honor our fellow Americans who serve and sacrifice. This week, the Pentagon released the name of one soldier killed in Afghanistan. And we'll be right back with a holiday thank you.